The dust in the chapel was holy. Elara was sure of it. It moted in the slants of late afternoon sun that fell through the single-pane windows, each particle a tiny, spinning world illuminated by the grace of her father's voice. At 17, her world was defined by the walls of their small homestead and the boundaries of Scripture. She was the preacher's daughter, his helper, his pure and spotless lamb. Tonight, she was polishing the communion silver when the light outside changed. The gentle gold of the setting sun was blotted out, not by clouds, but by two immense silhouettes that filled the doorway. Elara froze, a polished chalice cold in her hands. They were the Cartwright twins, men from a story too wild and earthly for her father's sermons. They were rumored to have built their ranch with their own hands, felling trees a normal man couldn't wrap his arms around. Seeing them now, crammed into the humble doorway, Elara believed it. They were giants, each one a mountain of denim and worn leather. Their faces were identical, carved from the same weathered oak, with pale, calm eyes that held no trace of the frontier fury people whispered about. Their sheer size seemed to suck the air and the holiness right out of the room. Her father, Pastor Miller, stood up from his desk, his smile tight and nervous. "Boys, welcome. To what do we owe the honor?" The twin on the right, the one with a faint scar through his eyebrow, Jeb, she thought, tipped his hat. His voice was a low rumble, like stones deep under the earth. "Preacher, we've come to settle our tithe." The other, Caleb, let his gaze drift over the simple chapel before settling on Elara. It wasn't a leering look, nor was it unkind. It was assessing, as if he were judging the worth of a heifer or a parcel of land. She felt a flush creep up her neck. "Tithe," her father stammered. That's very generous of you. The church roof, you know, it still needs." "We're not tithing money, preacher," Caleb interrupted, his voice a match for his brother's. He took a step inside, and the floorboards groaned in protest. "We're tithing in kind. We've brought 5 prime steers. They're penned out back. They'll feed your congregation through the winter." Pastor Miller's eyes widened. 5 steers was a fortune. It was salvation. "My boys, that is, the Lord blesses you for your generosity." He moved to clasp Jeb's shoulder, his hand looking like a child's against the expanse of leather and muscle. Jeb didn't move, his eyes fixed on the pastor. "A tithe is a tenth, preacher. We've given our tenth of the herd. But a transaction, even with the Lord, has 2 sides. There's the giving, and the taking." The room went still. Elara's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I don't understand," her father said, his voice losing its grateful tone, gaining an edge of fear. Caleb's gaze returned to Elara, pinning her in place. "We've given our part. Now we're here to collect what's due." He paused, letting the silence thicken. "We've come for the girl." Elara. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over her. The chalice slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the rag-covered table. "What?" her father breathed, the word barely audible. Jeb laid it out, his tone as flat and factual as if he were discussing the weather. "You'll take both of us tonight," he said, his pale eyes locking with Elara's. The giant Cowboy twins told the preacher's virgin teen daughter. "It's a simple thing. A night with us, for the security of your flock. A fair trade. This is an abomination." Pastor Miller finally found his voice, a shrill, cracking thing. "She is my daughter. A child of God. You cannot, I will not allow." "You will," Caleb said, his voice dropping into a register. "That was utterly final. Because if you don't, we take the steers back. And we take your winter seed grain. And we burn your barn for good measure. You can have a daughter who is untouched, preacher, and a congregation that starves and freezes. Or you can have a fed flock and a daughter who's known a man." 2 men. They stood there, immovable, their offer hanging in the dusty air like a condemnation. Elara looked at her father, at the conflict warping his features. She saw the fear, the calculation, the terrible, pragmatic weight of leadership. She saw the moment he broke. His shoulders slumped. He couldn't look at her. "Elara," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. For the good of the church. The world, the holy, dust-moted world she knew, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The walk to the Cartwright ranch was a silent, nightmarish procession. Elara walked between the 2 giants, their strides slow to match her smaller ones, yet she felt like a lamb being led to a slaughter she didn't understand. The night air was cool, but it did nothing to soothe the fire of humiliation and fear burning in her chest. Her father had not even watched her go. They entered a long, low-slung ranch house. It was clean but starkly masculine, smelling of wood smoke, leather, and coffee. There were no frills, no touches of a woman's hand. "Sit," Jeb said, pointing to a heavy wooden chair by the fireplace. She sat, her back rigid, her hands clenched in the fabric of her simple dress. She expected rough hands, drunken demands, the violence she'd heard whispered about in warnings. It was what she had braced for. Caleb knelt before the hearth and built a fire with practiced efficiency. Jeb went to a cupboard and brought out a glass and a bottle of amber liquid. He poured a finger and brought it to her. "Drink," he said. "It'll warm you." She stared at it, then at him. "I don't want your warmth." A flicker of something, not anger, perhaps respect, crossed his face. He set the glass on the small table beside her. "Suit yourself." They didn't touch her. They didn't even come near her. Instead, they sat opposite her, on a worn leather sofa, and they talked. "You think we're monsters," Caleb began, his voice losing its transactional edge, becoming almost conversational. Elara said nothing. Her silence was her agreement. "This land is hard," Jeb continued, picking up the thread. "It doesn't care for sermons or virtue. It cares for strength, for blood, for legacy. We've built an empire out of dirt and sweat," Caleb said, his gaze intense. "But an empire without an heir is just a pile of wood that will rot when we're gone. We need a son, a strong one. The women in town, they're either already married, or they're weak," Jeb stated, no malice in it, just a cold fact. "Their bloodlines are thin. But your father is a man of conviction. You're strong. You're healthy. You're untainted." The realization dawned on Elara, horrible and clinical. This wasn't about lust. It was about breeding. "You're the best stock," Caleb said, confirming her terrible thought. "So we made an offer your father, a man who deals in souls, could understand. A trade. A tithe. We won't force you," Jeb said, and the words were so unexpected they broke through her frozen terror. "Not in the way you're thinking. This land forces everyone. It forced our hand to make this choice. It forced your father's hand to accept. Now it forces you to choose." "Choose what?" Elara whispered, her voice trembling. "To lie back and think of your father's congregation, if that's what gets you through it," Caleb said. "Or to see the opportunity. You will not be cast aside. The mother of our heir will want for nothing. You will have a place, respect, and a son who will inherit all of this." He gestured to the house, the land beyond. "You can be a scared girl who was traded for 5 steers, or you can be the foundation of a dynasty. That choice is yours alone." The fire crackled, filling the silence. The drink sat beside her, untouched. They had reframed the entire night, not as a violation, but as a contract. A brutal, unforgiving contract, but one with a strange, twisted form of honor. They weren't offering passion or love. They were offering a partnership in legacy. It was a colder, harder thing than she had imagined, and in its own way, more terrifying. Elara did not touch the whiskey. She sat in the high-backed chair, the fire warming her skin while a cold war raged within her soul. The giants on the sofa waited, their patience as immense as their bodies. They had laid out the brutal economics of their proposal, and now they were letting the land, as they called it, work on her. She thought of her father's shame-filled eyes. She thought of the hungry families in their congregation who would eat because of her. She thought of a life defined only by being a preacher's daughter, then a preacher's wife, her world never expanding beyond the chapel walls. It was a safe life, a holy life. But was it a life? Then she thought of the alternative. To be the woman of this house. To be the mother of a son who would one day command this vast, wild empire. It wasn't safety. It was power. A terrifying, raw, earthly power that her father's God never spoke of. Slowly, she stood up. The twins watched her, their expressions unreadable. She walked to the door of the bedroom. A room she could see was dominated by a single, massive bed built to accommodate men of their size. She stopped at the threshold and looked back at them. "You said I was the best stock," she said, her voice no longer a tremulous whisper. It was clear and carried a new, unfamiliar weight. "You said the mother of your heir would want for nothing. That she would have respect." "We did," Jeb said, his gaze steady. "Then the deal is not just for one night," Elara stated. It wasn't a question. "The deal is for a legacy. My terms are these: I am not a broodmare to be put out to pasture. I will learn the business of this ranch. The ledgers, the deals, the management of the herd. I will be a partner in this, not just a vessel. Caleb's eyebrows rose slightly. A long moment of silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Agreed, he said finally. Jeb gave a single, slow nod. Agreed. Elara took a deep breath, the last breath of the preacher's virgin daughter. She stepped into the bedroom, and the giants rose to follow her. The following dawn, Elara walked back to the homestead as the sun painted the sky in hues of rose and gold. She was sore in ways she had never been, her body a map of a new and startling geography. But she walked with her back straight and her head held high. She was not the same girl who had polished the communion silver. Her father was waiting on the porch, his face a mask of anguish and guilt. He rushed toward her, his hands fluttering, words of apology and scripture tumbling from his lips. She stopped him with a look. The look was not one of forgiveness, nor of condemnation. It was the calm, assessing look she had learned from the twins. The tithe has been paid, Father, she said, her voice calm. The congregation will be fed. My child, what have they done to you? He moaned. They have given me a choice, she replied. And I have made it. She walked past him, into the house, to gather her things. She was not leaving in shame. She was moving to her new home. A month later, the whispers in town had shifted. They no longer spoke of the poor preacher Miller's violated daughter. They spoke of Elara Cartwright, for she had taken their name, who rode the range with the twins, who could read a ledger as well as any man, and whose quiet authority seemed to match the giants she stood between. She was no longer a girl traded for 5 steers. She was the woman who had looked into the harsh logic of the wilderness and, instead of breaking, had forged her own place within it. She was the foundation. And she knew, with a certainty that ran as deep as the well on the ranch, that the son growing in her womb would one day inherit not just a pile of wood, but an empire.